These are some great cities of the world. Have you ever wondered how these cities emerged? At the end of this lesson, you should be able to give reasons why the population of London expanded from the middle of the 18th century. Explain the social changes in London that led to the need for underground railway. State the changes in the kind of work available to women in London between the 19th and the 20th century. Describe the forms of entertainment that came up in the 19th century England to provide leisure activities for the people. Can you compare these two locations? One of them belongs to a rural area and the other belongs to an urban area. We have two different social economic categories in the society: villages or towns and cities. What difference do you see in a village and a city? Villages imply sparsely settled or an area where agriculture is the main occupation of the people. But a town or a city is densely populated and people are engaged in various activities for a living. What comes to your mind when we talk about towns or cities? Cities themselves can vary greatly in size and complexity. It can be a huge metropolis that supports a very large population or smaller urban center with limited functions. Whatever it is, there are varied activities. A city seems to offer a series of contrasting images and experiences: wealth and poverty, splendor and dirt, opportunities and disappointments. Towns and cities that first appeared along river valleys such as Ur, Nippur and Mohenjo-daro were larger in scale than other human settlements. How do you think cities were developed? Ancient cities developed when an increase in food supplies made it possible to support other people who are engaged in various non-farm activities. The agricultural produce needed to be converted to finished products. This led to manufacturing of tools that helped create the finished products. Then, the finished product had to be sold. Some of it was sold locally and some to the outsiders. Thus, a market came into existence. The creation of market brought a lot of people together from far and near. Development or growth of cities is known as urbanization. Though urbanization has a long history, the modern city worldwide has developed only over the last 200 years. Let us look at the growth of urbanization with two examples: London in United Kingdom and Bombay, present Mumbai in India. Sham, who lives in the workers' colony in the city, was originally the inhabitant of a remote village away from the city. What makes Sham leave his village and move to the city? Better opportunities for earning made him move to the city. This is a common scenario all over the world. Recall the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Where did Industrial Revolution begin in Europe? Britain was the place from where Industrial Revolution flourished all over Europe. The early industrial cities of Britain, such as Leeds and Manchester, attracted large numbers of migrants to the textile mills set up in the late 18th century. If everyone found it attractive to move to the cities, what do you think would happen to the cities? Cities kept growing. By 1750, London also became a colossal city with a population of about 675,000. Though it did not have large factories, London attracted many people from rural areas. Have a look at the map to observe the growth of London over eras. London dockyards and 5 major types of industries employed large number of people, such as clothing and footwear, wood and furniture, metals and engineering, printing and stationery, and precision products like surgical instruments, watches, and objects of precious metal. During the First World War, London began manufacturing motor cars and electrical goods, and factories accounted one-third of all jobs in the city. Recall from Industrial Revolution that brought women and children to factories. Factories employed large numbers of women in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. With technological developments, women gradually lost their industrial jobs and were forced to work within households. The 1861 census recorded 250,000 domestic servants in London, of whom the vast majority were women. Large number of women tried to increase family income by taking in lodgers or other activities such as tailoring, washing or matchbox making. Large numbers of children were pushed into low-paid work, often by their parents. Thus, they found crime such as stealing profitable than low-paid work. This created some people who made a living from crime. They were the cheats and tricksters, pickpockets and petty thieves crowding the streets of London. Thus, the authorities had to impose high penalties for crime and offered work to those who were considered the deserving poor. Only in 1870, the Compulsory Elementary Education Act and 1902, the Factory Acts beginning kept children out of industrial work. Like the modern cities in 19th century suffered many problems. Can you have big and spacious dwellings if you had to accommodate large population? No, that is why tenements came up. The migrant workers had to live in cheap and usually unsafe tenements, run-down and often overcrowded apartment house, especially made for poor section of the society. But gradually, there was an increasing concern for the housing of the poor. Houses are supposed to provide us security, but what if they are poorly built? Wouldn't that be the reason for concern? The prevailing unhygienic housing had serious threat to public health. There were worries of fire hazards created by poor housing. Fear of social disorder, especially after the Russian Revolution in 1917. Thus, city gradually becomes congested and unhealthy. Similarly, a variety of steps were taken to clean up London. Attempts were made to decongest localities, green the open spaces, reduce pollution and landscape the city. Large blocks of apartments were built. Rent control was introduced in Britain during the First World War. Demands were made for new lungs for the city and attempts were made to bridge the difference between city and countryside through green belts around London. 1 million houses, most of them single-family cottages, were built by local authorities. In this way, the city had extended beyond the range where people could walk to work. But how could people be persuaded to leave the city and live in garden suburbs? Look at this advertisement you frequently see in your city. Find your affordable green home away from all the commotion of the city. Nowadays, people prefer staying peacefully away from city hustle, but their workplaces are located in the city. How do you think people commute in that case? How such problems were solved in London? You must have read the steps taken by the government to solve similar problems. What would you do if you had the power to do something about it? There had to be better means of traveling to the city for work. Thus, the London Underground Railway evolved that partially solved the housing crisis by carrying large masses of people to and from the city. The very first section of the Underground Railways in the world opened on 10th January 1863 between Paddington and Farrington Street in London. By 1880, the expanded train service was carrying 40 million passengers a year. Look at this news clip. The slum dwellers of Jai Bhim Nagar, whose properties were demolished to make way for metro construction work, would be rehabilitated. What can you infer from the news clip? That is what happened then. About 900 houses had to be destroyed for constructing approximately 2 miles of railway. Thus, there was massive displacement of the London poor. The function and the shape of the family were completely transformed by life in the industrial city. Due to busy schedule of the workers, ties between members of households loosened. On the other hand, women of the upper and middle classes in Britain faced increasingly higher levels of isolation, although their lives were made easier by domestic maids. Women who worked for wages had some control over their lives. But men and women did not have equal access to this new urban space. As women lost their industrial jobs and conservative people railed against their presence in public spaces, women were forced to withdraw into their homes. But gradually, women came to participate in political movements for suffrage that demanded the right to vote for women, or for married women's rights to property. Now, let us look at another aspect of city life. Assuming you live in a city, what is that you usually do during weekends and holidays? The new industrial city in London, too, provided opportunities to enjoy mass leisure on Sundays and other common holidays. For wealthy Britons, there had long been an annual London season. Several cultural events, such as the opera, the theatre, and classical music performances, were organized for elite group. Working classes met in pubs to have a drink, exchange news, and sometimes organized political action. Libraries, art galleries, and museums were established in the 19th century to provide people with a sense of history and pride in the achievements of the British. Music halls were popular among the lower classes, and by the early 20th century, cinema became the great mass entertainment. British industrial workers were increasingly encouraged to spend their holidays by the sea. In political sphere, people became alert. What do you think would be the result of such awareness? There were many riots demanding various rights. 1886, when outdoor work came to a standstill, the London poor exploded in a riot demanding relief from the terrible conditions of poverty. The marchers had to be dispersed by the police. Similar riots occurred in late 1887, which were brutally suppressed by the police in and later that came to be known as the Bloody Sunday of November 1887. From these examples, it is clear that large masses of people could be drawn into political causes in the city. Thus, a large city population was both a threat and an opportunity.